In tonight's Dorchester segment, we hear about a new push for affordable housing, projects funded by the Community Preservation Act, along with concerns about vacant retail space and a stubborn problem property. To fill us in is the news editor of the Dorchester Reporter, Jennifer Smith. Thank you very much for being with us again, Jen.
Of course.
First, I want to ask you about a story that's probably got a lot of people on edge in Dorchester right now. Another wave of Catholic parish consolidations, this time St. Anne's and St. Brendan's and then the Ponce Cedar Grove area. So why is this such a big deal for people?
Right, so when we're talking about the St. Anne's, St. Brendan's, that's a collaborative parish. So they kind of operate and have operated for a while now as just one parish. So they've got a shared community. And just a few weeks ago, on May 25th, I believe, some of the priests sent out a letter to the parish community saying, we're in really bad shape right now. The collections aren't meeting the needed amount to offset just operations costs alone. You've got something like $2.1 million in deferred maintenance costs. Attendance at Mass is so far down. We need to start thinking about making some hard decisions. And what they've basically given the parishioners, or specifically the parish council, so not the folks that go to church themselves, but a small group that represents the parishes, they've said, you guys need to come up with a plan of some sort by August, at some point in August, to explain how you're going to, A, double attendance at both of these parishes or at both of these churches to 750, so it's actually almost 3 times as much, and also pay off the back debt, deal with some significant deficits across both of the parishes. And the reaction from the community has been really kind of shocked on 2 fronts. One, that this seems to have been a big enough problem and yet the timeline to fix it is so short. And also a real question that came up at a meeting I was covering the other night, which is just, the directive's actually pretty vague. If you're saying there's a deficit, if you're saying there are operational issues, if you're saying there are structural issues with the buildings, but then don't actually break down the numbers for anyone, how much of a plan can you actually come up with?
Now, of course, I know these parishes, they are a nexus of spiritual and social attachments for the people who are still engaged in them, but they also got schools, at least on their grounds, and St. Brendan's is an independent school, so I imagine people are worried about where they're going to send their kids, right?
People are very worried about this. So what we're talking about right now are the churches themselves. The schools aren't really at issue as far as the Archdiocese is concerned at the moment, but again, one thing that they're bringing up is the way that the Archdiocese seem to have approached the buildings situation is there's not a lot of faith that they aren't also in danger of losing the schools further down the line. And so there's been some discussion, because there are 2 schools, 2 churches, is basically, should this be something that's dealt with individually because one of them has more capital but one of them has more of an operational issue? Or if the Archdiocese is considering them a single parish, should you be going forward from there?
Turning to another topic here, community preservation. The city has these new funds because we approved a new tax measure, and there are some projects in Dorchester that are going to be getting funded from this.
Yeah, so 6 projects in Dorchester are in line for the first round of Community Preservation Act funding, which, in case anyone isn't familiar, it did pass overwhelmingly, but it's a 1% property tax surcharge, and all the funds have to go to either historic preservation, affordable housing, or open space. And so there are a lot of projects that they were looking for that were just shovel ready for this first round. They're going to do another round in the fall. And 6 of them are in Dorchester, and it's a good mix, actually. So 2 of the 3 affordable housing projects are both slated to get $500,000, which is the maximum amount that could go out in this first round. Then the beloved clap houses, which the Dorchester Historical Society put out for funding for, are also set to get about $51,000, which if you talk to the Historical Society, they'll point out that kind of doesn't go very far, but they'll get some new paint and some new fencing done. And interestingly, the Sip and Spoke Bike Kitchen, it looks like it's going to get $370-some thousand. And this is what used to be this little disused comfort station in the middle of Upham's Corner that is now going to be a combination bike shop and cafe. So it looks like Dorchester is going to get a few of these projects that are kind of go to the core of what the Preservation Act was supposed to do, which is to really revitalize visible parts of the town.
That comfort station has been vacant for decades. I got used to it being vacant. I had no idea what it ever was in the first place.
It just looks like a shed, kind of. Yeah.
And the thing that's interesting is that that side of Columbia Road, it is dead. Of course, there's a cemetery there. But if you've got traffic going to that bike station, I mean, what does that do for the business district?
I mean, it's actually a great location as well because, as you'll recall, we've talked before, and there's actually a deadline coming up. The city's in the middle of redoing Upham's Corner right now. They're looking at taking all of these lots, everything from the Strand Theater to 2 different bank buildings to a city-owned lot in the back. And they basically want to create a new arts innovation district, and they're planning on putting out draft language for the request for proposals actually at the end of June. So to have kind of this, really it's a small piece of it, but it's also it's minority owned, so you kind of have that additional level of equity involved in it, but just kind of having a coffee shop, having a place where people can kind of walk around and hang out, especially when you're anticipating that area getting a lot more bustling in the coming years.
And this is an idea that sprang from a real bike enthusiast. He's a real sort of grassroots
Noah
figure.
Moore, formerly Noah Hicks, so he's the Bowdoin Bike School. He's all over this. Anywhere he can put a bike shop, he will.
I want to ask you about some other vacant commercial properties, and these are places, I guess, storefronts that for some reason never seem to have anything going on in them. And the city council is getting involved in this. So what's at stake here?
So what's at stake right now is it's a really big problem for local business communities, really, that across the city you're actually seeing kind of an encouraging downtick. It's about a 6% vacancy rate for commercial storefronts around the city. But some of the councilors notice that there are some neighborhoods that are really not seeing a boost. They're not seeing quite as much investment. So if you look at, for instance, the Grove Hall area, the vacancy rate for commercial buildings there is 15.1%. It's more than twice the actual city rate of it. And the impact that this has is not only there are no businesses in those shops, so of course money is not coming into the community, but there's a real disheartening effect too if people are walking past these empty storefronts constantly. So there is a push on the city side, especially from elected officials and advocates, to say, what can be done with this? Can we incentivize an easier way to use these vacant lots, these vacant commercial buildings, or are we kind of just stuck hoping that someone's willing to dredge through the bureaucracy and the permit process and kind of pull them into use rather than the city get involved?
Now, the funny thing about these buildings is that maybe in some places, the surrounding economy or income levels might not be too impressive, but there are other places where you would think that people have some spending power and there are things that they need, and yet you've got these vacant spaces.
Exactly. I mean, Jamaica Plain has a lot of these vacant spaces. Downtown has a lot of these. This whole thing came up because there were some prime commercial parcels downtown that were just sitting empty, and you'd think these should be in use. It's ridiculous that they aren't being used.
Well, another vacancy problem on Mount Ida Road. This has been there for a long time, and there's a whole tangle of litigation around it, and I guess it's just not budging.
It's not going anywhere. It's you have these moments where city officials are a little bit hopeful, and then it just gets smacked down all over again. So there's this 3-decker 97 Mount Ida Road that has been an issue for, more than 15 years now. It was initially condemned in 2003. Since then, there have been fires. It's been boarded up. It's considered completely impassable as far as the fire department's concerned and ISD is concerned, inspectional services. And the owner, James Dickey, has really been tangling up the process in the legal system. So there's a really robust set of property owner protections in the city, which of course is a good thing. But it also means that in suing across several different court levels, he's been able to stop housing court, for instance, from giving the city permission to knock it down. And it's just kind of become a real headache for the community. And for context, it's very blighted. It's basically got the windows boarded up, half of it's falling off. And it went back to court this week because the city actually had a small win, which was the court appointed a receiver to take it over from the owner and make recommendations about the best use of the property. It's in such a condition, the receiver actually said, I can't even recommend anything yet. It needs to get cleaned out first, which could run $10,000. So it's a crazy situation.
Well, as always, there are people in Boston who need more access to affordable housing. There's a group based in Dorchester trying to do something about that, and I guess there are some moves by the city as well. So talk about that.
Yeah, so there are a bunch of affordable housing advocacy programs, and especially homeownership advocacy programs like MAHA, which is based in Dorchester, the Massachusetts Affordable Housing Alliance. And they had a rally last week with a lot of local people, and also about half the city council showed up as well. And they're proposing something pretty bold. They say we need at least 1,000 new units of housing over the next 5 years that are dedicated for people making around $40,000 or so, $40,000 a year. So significantly below what, most market rate housing is going for in Boston. And they estimate this could cost up to $60 million a year. So it's not an insignificant amount that they're asking for. City councilors who were there said they're supportive of this goal. They know we're in a housing crunch, and they're really worried about people getting displaced at the same time. So the question basically is, where do you get this money from? And a few of the proposals floated, still on the early end now, are things like increasing developer fees, raising the inclusionary development policy standards for building affordable units as part of other developments. And one thing that was very popular is there's the payment in lieu of tax payments, pilot payments, which basically mean that cultural institutions like universities, hospitals, that kind of thing, should be paying in community benefits agreements and kind of really helping out the communities in which they serve. And there's a big pressure now to turn those from voluntary to mandatory because they're leaving a lot of money on the table.
And finally, as always, there are more stories and more updates in these. So if people want to find them in the Reporter or on your own feed, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, so if you're looking at the Reporter website, we're at .news.com, or you can follow us as a newspaper at Twitter at .news, or me at Jen.Smith.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Of course, Chris.
Jen Smith from the Dorchester Reporter.